Welcome to our journey of transformation. We have been studying in the fifth stage of our journey the parables, the conversations, and the principles of Jesus that help us understand how to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. And this lesson now will be the last one in that part of our journey. And the next time we'll go on to the sixth stage of our journey. But for now, the title of our study is Treat Others the Way You Want Them to Treat You. And our reading is found in Luke chapter 6, verse 27 to 36. Luke 6, 27 to 36. There Jesus says to us in the Sermon on the Mount, "But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful." Many years ago, when I was a university student studying philosophy, my professor and mentor was Dr. Kashyap. He was educated in the University of Bombay in India and then the University of Oxford in England. And he received recognition as a scholar of ancient Indian philosophy as well as European rationalist philosophy. My most memorable classes with Dr. Kashyap dealt with moral reasoning and the interpretation of moral principles. His style of teaching was engaging and challenging. Since he required students to carefully question their own mental framework and assumptions, it was not surprising that one day in a small seminar class on ethics, he said, "Mr. Fox, he knows one of the most powerful moral principles ever taught. What is it, Mr. Fox?" Now, he knew my ethical background and was never afraid to put his students on the spot. Then, before I could answer, he quoted the words of Jesus in Luke chapter 6, verse 31. "Do unto others as you would have them do to you." Dr. Kashyap believed in the magnitude of this principle because he understood that from this one principle we could derive every other moral obligation towards our fellow human beings. Treating other people the way we want them to treat us will logically obligate us to seek peace, while refusing to abuse or cheat, form prejudices, or pay back evil for evil, and to serve the benefit of others instead of living only for ourselves. As part of our journey of transformation, we began the fifth stage of our journey with the parable of the Good Samaritan, in which Jesus beautifully illustrates the practical meaning of the principle to love our neighbors as ourselves. And now it's appropriate for us to conclude this stage by thinking about the principle, do to others as you would have them do to you. Because these two principles are similar bookends that hold together and contain all the other moral teachings of Jesus. His teachings about forgiveness, compassion, mercy, and humility are examples of how to love our neighbors as ourselves, as well as how to treat others the way we want them to treat us. Jesus taught this truth in his Sermon on the Mount when he said, "So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets." Matthew 7:12. And in a similar way, Paul, a passionate follower of Jesus, wrote, "The commandments, do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not covet it, and whatever other command there might be, are summed up in this one rule. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to its neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. Romans 13, verse 9 and 10. So whether we begin with how we care for ourselves or how we would want others to treat us, we will arrive at the same set of moral obligations. Now think about how the principle, do to others as you would have them do to you, works out in practice. If we desire people to be truthful to us, then we decide to be truthful ourselves. On the other hand, if we decide to lie, then we must accept at the same time that people will lie to us, and we ought not to become angry with them or condemn them for lying to us. In fact, we ought not to be disappointed if the world were full of lying. The principle requires us to think not only about how we want people to treat us, but also how we would want them to treat each other. For instance, if we were to decide that lying is morally acceptable to us, then we must approve what the world would be like if everyone accepted lying as a normal part of human relationships. We can imagine what relationships would be like if this were the case, with people readily deceiving, cheating, and betraying each other. If we decide we would not want to live in a world such as this, where there is no responsibility to tell the truth, then we must accept telling the truth as our moral responsibility. And if we want to live in a world where people hold themselves responsible for telling the truth, then not only must we tell the truth, but also be consistent in requiring others to tell the truth. Logically, we would have the right to form rules or laws for everyone to follow about telling the truth. The purpose of moral principles is, in fact, not just for the benefit of one's own personal life, but for the benefit of society. A system of moral principles that everyone ought to accept is necessary to allow human beings to live productively and peacefully together in society. Cooperating and living in harmony require agreement about how to treat each other. So treating others the way we want to be treated leads us to a set of moral principles that everyone ought to practice, principles that ought to be universal. And the commitment to treat others as we would have them treat us also produces a set of moral obligations that are unconditional. They do not depend on how people treat us. Even though people lie to us, we still want them to tell the truth. We would not want them to tell us the truth on some occasions and then lie to us on other occasions. Our desire for the truth does not change, and interestingly, even becomes stronger when they lie to us and we suffer the consequences of their lies. Since we decide that we always want people to tell us the truth, we must commit ourselves unconditionally to telling the truth. The way we wish for people to treat us will not change, regardless of how people treat us or who they are. Remember, we discovered in the last lesson that the principle of loving our neighbors as we love ourselves also leads to unconditional moral behavior. Since the way we love or care for others does not change, the way we love others, since the way that we love and care for ourselves does not change, the way we love others ought not to change, no matter who the people are. Loving our neighbors means to do good even to those who hate us. Treating others the way we want them to treat us will also lead us to treat friend and enemy in the same way. Thinking carefully about the unconditional nature of moral principles, such as telling the truth, leads to more questions that unavoidably arise. For instance, we can imagine that if an enemy were unjustly pursuing our friend to kill her, and she came into our house to find a place to hide, we would hide her. And then if the enemy of our friend came to our door and asked us if we were hiding her, we might make the moral decision to lie and say no. Why would we make this decision? We know that if we were the ones fleeing from someone who wanted to kill us, we would want our friends also to hide us and even to lie to the pursuers. Treat others the way you would want them to treat you. Love your neighbors as you love yourself. By lying to the pursuers, we are accepting the moral obligation to save life, even when saving life requires us to lie. Our decision to lie in this instance would not mean, however, that now we could accept lying in all circumstances, but instead only under these precise circumstances. To save life. The moral obligation to tell the truth in other clearly different contexts is still unconditional. And surprisingly, the moral obligation to lie when necessary to protect life would also be unconditional. In view of the teaching of the Good Samaritan, if our enemy came to our door seeking refuge from another enemy who was unjustly pursuing him to kill him, we would be obligated to protect him also. And lots of careful thinking to be done here before we make moral decisions, but this is what the challenge of living a truly moral life is all about. For the sake of space, we will call the principle, do unto others as you would have them do to you, the unconditional principle. The opposite of the unconditional principle is to treat others the way they treat you. We can call that opposite principle the conditional principle, because in this case, our behavior depends on or is conditioned on the behavior of others. Following the conditional principle, our treatment of others is a reaction. In its best form, it is a just reaction, but it's just a reaction to the behavior of others. We respect people if they respect us. We become angry with people if they become angry with us. The conditional principle does not consider what kind of world we would like it to be, but instead reacts to the world the way it is. It cannot hope for a better world, but must be satisfied with the way the world is. Sometimes people, even followers of Jesus, who are acquainted with both principles, might begin by treating people the way they would want to be treated. They hope that by treating people with love and kindness, the people around them will see the truth and begin to treat them in the same way. But they might not experience what they hope for. The people around them may not adopt the more loving and kinder behavior, and instead continue in their habitually disrespectful and selfish ways. As a result, the practitioners of the unconditional principle might decide to change to the conditional principle, treating others the way others treat them, so I can teach them a lesson about how it feels, they might say. Thus, they abandon the unconditional principle. But if they were to abandon it under these circumstances, the truth is they did not understand the unconditional quality of the principle in the first place. The unconditional principle, treat others the way you want them to treat you, is unconditional. We do not choose to practice morally responsible behavior so that others will treat us well. Instead, we practice moral behavior because we would like others to behave in the same way. What we want for others does not change, regardless of how they treat us. What we want the world to be like does not change. So the way we treat others does not change, regardless of what other people do or do not do. In the passage we are considering, Jesus contrasted the conditional and the unconditional principles. On the one hand, everyone knows how to love those who love them. Everyone, believer and non-believer, knows he or she ought to do good to those who do good to them. Everyone feels confident lending to people who have the ability and inclination to pay them back completely. These are, of course, examples of the conditional principle. Treat others the way they treat you. Jesus, however, calls his followers to a higher life, one that can truly aspire to moral progress. Love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Do good whether or not people do good for you. Notice here again, just as with the principle of loving your neighbor as yourself inevitably leads to loving our enemies, the unconditional principle also leads us to loving those who oppose us or even seek our destruction. We love them because we wish for them to love us instead of opposing us or hating us. Loving our enemies is not an extreme form of moral behavior reserved only for those followers of Jesus who wish to be devoted. Instead, loving our enemies is a logical conclusion of following his teachings. It is the life he was leading us to from the very beginning. Refusing to love our enemies is to abandon completely the principle to treat others the way we want them to treat us. And in fact, to abandon the entire moral life that Jesus is teaching us to cultivate, step by step. Imagine what the conditional principle would look like in practice. It might sound familiar to us. If we only loved those who love us, and the ones we love follow the same conditional principle, they would love us because we love them. They love because they receive something from us. Notice that by loving only those who love us, we become locked in a circle of loving only people who deserve our love by loving us first. We would not be able to leave this circle to become a neighbor to someone who may never love us. What believers discover, or rather when they discover that their lives consist of only spending time with people who are like them and care for them, their discovery should be a warning that they do not love as Jesus taught us to love. They cannot fulfill the second greatest commandment, and they are not committed to the unconditional principle that together form the core of Jesus' moral teaching. Children undoubtedly love because they are loved, but we hope their ability to love matures. If it does not, then when they are teenagers, they will love us only if we give them what they want, in the form that they want. The picture looks even worse for those who hate the ones who hate them. If the ones whom they hate also follow the same principle and hate those who hate them, then both parties are locked in an inescapable circle of hate. For this reason, Jesus made his point clear. Do good to those who hate you. I was once speaking with a group of young gang members about respect. They strongly believed in the need to show respect, but they explained in clear terms that they only respect those who respect them. So I asked them to imagine how this thinking works out. Think about what would happen if two gang members agreed to respect each other if the other first shows respect. They would find themselves waiting for the other to show respect. The question is, who is going to make the first move? But whoever makes the first move must do so without receiving respect. Of course, if he does not receive respect back from the person in the way he wishes, within the time frame he wishes, he will not continue to show respect and in fact may show disrespect. Just because he takes the first step, he cannot say he is a respectful person. Nor can he say he strongly believes in the need to show respect. The truth is that no one who ends up following the conditional principle can claim moral virtues, such as being respectful for themselves. Such a claim is only possible through commitment to the unconditional principle. Someone might ask, well, if we do good and love those who hate us, what is the point of continuing to love them if they continue to hate us? But the goal of our unconditional moral behavior is not necessarily to change the moral behavior of others. We would love that for that to happen, but it is not the principal goal. We love not because of who people are for us or what they do for us, but because of who we want to become. Doing to others as we would have them do to us leads us to living a truly exceptional life in which we can progress towards possessing moral virtues as part of our essence. We can only progress toward becoming respectful, patient, merciful, forgiving, and loving if our practice is unconditional, without depending on how the other person treats us. Jesus taught, "But love your enemies. Do good to them and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Heavenly Father is merciful." Our goal as children of God is to become like Him, possessing qualities such as mercy and love as part of who we are. We want to be transformed in the image of our Father. He is love. He is not just loving, He is love. Love is part of His essence that is independent of who we are or what we do. What He is in His nature and essence is unchanging. The closest we can become to being like Him in His image is to learn to practice the qualities of love unconditionally. Remember, if love ought to be unconditional, then mercy, as well as compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, forgiveness, peacemaking, they will all be unconditional, without depending on how people treat us. If our practice of these qualities were to depend on how other people practice them toward us, then our practice would always be changing, depending on what others do. Our character would constantly vacillate, and we would never truly become these qualities. But if we commit ourselves fully to treating others the way we want them to treat us, we can begin to live in these qualities. We begin to become them. Then will we be called the children of God. This is the exceptional life, far beyond conforming to the moral behavior of others, living instead the way the Creator calls us to live in intimate relationship with Him. John promises, "Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in him." 1 John 4, verse 16. Now, what do we learn about the qualities of love? Well, there's unconditional love, of course. It is to care for the welfare of another person without expecting anything in return or thinking about whether the person deserves our care. So what does this principle teach about the practice of unconditional love? Treating others the way we want them to treat us is the basis for unconditional love. If our love depends on how people love us in return, then we forfeit this principle and abandon Jesus' teaching about how we ought to live. Let's also take mercy, for instance. Mercy is to relieve another person's suffering without thinking about whether they deserve relief. So what does the principle teach us about the practice of mercy? Just as love is unconditional, mercy, an expression of love, is unconditional, as are the other expressions of love. Unconditional mercy allows us to be merciful as our Heavenly Father is merciful. Now it's our turn to create practice and do as the expert in the law was supposed to do after Jesus told him the parable of this Good Samaritan. Go and do likewise. Go and do the same. So, select a specific behavior or quality of love that you want to practice unconditionally, such as kindness or compassion. Keep a journal of moments when you practice the behavior regardless of how people treat you. Notice also when, without thinking, you simply react to people, treating them the way they treat you. And when you begin to practice with more consistency the quality of love you are working on, regardless of how people treat you, celebrate the joy of becoming this quality, possessing it as part of who you are. And when you do, may God bless you.